वेलकम बैक दोस्तों, आप सुन रहे हैं मॉर्निंग्स विद मनी। मैं हूं आपका मेज़बान मनी। और ब्रेक पे जाने से पहले मैंने बताया था कि आज हमारी मेहमान होंगी डॉक्टर सारा श्नाइडरमैन, जो कि यूबीसी एंथ्रोपोलॉजी डिपार्टमेंट के साथ आप जुड़ी हुई हैं। आप एसोसिएट प्रोफेसर हैं वहाँ पर, और स्कूल ऑफ पब्लिक पॉलिसी एंड ग्लोबल अफेयर्स में भी आप एफिलिएटेड हैं। आप जो हैं को लीड भी हैं यूबीसी का डिजास्टर रेजिलियंस रिसर्च नेटवर्क में। Dr. Sara Shneiderman is our guest on this segment. She is an associate professor at the UBC School of Anthropology. She is also affiliated with the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. She is also the co-lead of UBC's Disaster Resilience Research Network. A socio-cultural anthropologist, she has a lot of experience in covering natural disasters in various parts of the globe. Let us welcome Dr. Sara Shneiderman. Good morning, Sara.
Thank you. Thanks. Nice to be speaking with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So we had Shakeout BC just last week, and it was a quake drill which happened at the universities and offices, but not too many people participated. That's what my understanding is, because it seems that people don't take some of these things very seriously. They think that, well, these big events don't happen in BC. Why should we really bother? What is your take on this?
Well, thanks for introducing it in that way. Yes, Shakeout BC was last week, and it's actually part of a global process of earthquake preparedness drills, which has millions of people involved all over the globe. I believe there were at least 700,000 people registered to participate in BC. So how many actually participate from that number? Hard to know. Mm-hmm. But I think, as you say, it's often the case that, that people feel like, well, this hasn't happened to me, so I don't really need to worry about it. And here in BC, that's particularly an issue because there hasn't been a major earthquake here for over 300 years, since 1700. But as many listeners may have felt, there have been several smaller tremors just in the past several weeks. So that is a reminder that we are in an active zone and that it is helpful to be prepared and to know that a bigger earthquake could happen at any time. So the more we're able to actually practice and have some of this feeling in our bodies of what we actually need to do if we do feel a larger earthquake, the better we're going to be prepared if and when it does actually hit.
One of my nightmares is getting caught in a tsunami. I imagine myself on the coastline, and there's a huge wave which is hitting, but perhaps I've seen too many movies, tsunami movies or deep impact sort of movies. Is that really possible on the Pacific West Coast? Something like that?
Yes, I mean, we're definitely at risk of tsunami. Particularly areas of Vancouver Island have greater exposure on the coast. So those risks are real. That is part of what happened in relation to the massive earthquake in 1700. There was a tsunami. And one of the interesting things about that is that we know about the history of that event, both from First Nations oral narratives that preserve that memory, but also from written histories from Japan, where the tsunami also hit. So these can be really global events that affect mass numbers of people, and the fact that we haven't had one in our lifetimes doesn't mean that it's not possible.
Can we learn from other cultures and other countries how they deal with natural disasters? Nepal had a serious earthquake in 2015. In fact, I was in Delhi at that time, and I felt that, and there were so many aftershocks that came, and it was terrible being in the house, and I can only imagine how it was in Nepal. But can we learn something about community preparedness from those examples?
Absolutely, and that's a lot of what my own research has focused on in recent years. As an anthropologist, I've worked in Nepal as well as in India for over 25 years, and so the 2015 earthquakes in Nepal devastated many of the communities that I'm very close with and have worked in for many years, and so that became a real focal point for my own research. And I think that we have a great deal to learn here in BC, certainly from Nepal, from various states in India, that have coped with the aftermath of disaster, and also other world examples. So, in fact, many other parts of the world have much better established processes for post-disaster recovery, response and recovery than we do here. And so at the level of governance, we certainly have quite a lot to learn. Japan is also a very good example that has many measures for community preparedness and resilience built in to day-to-day practice and educational systems.
You have recently authored a paper called The Tin State, where you're talking about the post-earthquake Nepal and how tin structures have replaced some of these concrete things that were destroyed, or kacha houses. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, yes. So in Nepal, after the 2015 earthquakes, over 1 million houses were destroyed. And of course, it takes quite some time to begin any process of reconstruction. Mm-hmm. First, you have to deal with removing all of the rubble, then working out where and how to actually rebuild. And then, of course, there's a process of financing. And the National Reconstruction Authority in Nepal did make subsidies available to homeowners, but the process was very complicated and it was difficult for people to access the needed support. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, most people who had been affected by the disaster were living in what were intended to be temporary structures, and most of these were built out of CGI sheets or tin. And so these structures came to replace the traditional buildings made of mud and stone, and they were never intended to be permanent. But for many people, and also many public buildings such as schools and even parts of hospitals, police posts, etc., these became very much a way of life. Now it's almost 10 years after the earthquake. That anniversary will be in April 2025. So now many more houses and pieces of public infrastructure have been reconstructed, yet still the landscape is radically transformed. It looks very different than it did before the earthquakes.
Nepal is on a seismic zone, and I'm assuming that historically quakes have been a problem over there. So did they forget some of those lessons when 2015 happened? Did they resort to constructions that were not quake-proof? And is that something that we need to think about in BC as well?
Absolutely, yes. The last major earthquake in Nepal before 2015 was in 1934. So that means that it was really only the oldest living members of families who might have had their own lived experience of a large quake. There had been several smaller tremors, some of which I had felt as well in the 1990s and 2000s. But people weren't really thinking about this necessarily as the highest risk. Of course, I think that's an issue for us here and people anywhere as well. We deal with many different kinds of risk on a daily basis. Right now, of course, we're looking at many forms of climate-related risk, including things like the atmospheric river that we just experienced this weekend in BC, as well as other kinds of storms, drought, extreme heat. Then you add earthquakes into the mix. And of course, if people are struggling with basic livelihoods, they're also thinking about just providing for their families and being able to eat every day. And having to calculate all of those different forms of risk and vulnerability together means that earthquakes might not always be at the top of people's minds. So in Nepal also, there was not a very rigorous implementation of building codes for earthquake resilience, particularly not in rural areas, which is where the devastation was greatest. That has been addressed after 2015, and in the post-earthquake reconstruction program, there was a very elaborate application of certain design principles which were intended to make people's future houses safer. And I think many people really wanted to learn those technologies in order to build more resilient houses. At the same time, some of the constraints that people faced in terms of what they needed to do to access the subsidies made it quite difficult for them to achieve new homes that were really livable as well as resilient. So we can learn from some of that here in BC as well. First of all, for us to prioritize planning before a disaster. We're in a period here now in BC where we're aware of the risk, but we're not actually facing imminent destruction. So that's a great time for us to be building resilience at individual, household, community, and government levels, taking some of the measures that we need to ensure that structures are as safe as they can be, but also that people have the awareness and the resources they need to protect themselves and also to support community members who may be most vulnerable.
What exactly is the Disaster Resilience Research Network doing? Are you also advising government on policy about quake protection or natural disaster protection? Yeah.
Yes, so thanks for asking about that. We are a network of scholars at UBC from across the disciplines. So one of the things that we do is bring together expertise in social science, such as myself, with expertise in natural sciences and applied sciences. So we're working across the disciplines with social scientists, engineers, geologists, and many other colleagues in planning, et cetera, in order to look at how we approach disaster resilience in an integrated, holistic manner. If we have only the technical knowledge we need to build resilient buildings, we may not be able to address the social issues that often prevent people from implementing best practice. If we have only the social knowledge about community networks, we may not be able to bring in the scientific best practice. And so we're trying to bring all of that together with a strong attention to inclusive and just practice for disaster preparedness. And yes, we are working as a network with the provincial Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, and we're also working, several of us currently, with the City of Vancouver on a new survey that's just launched about personal emergency preparedness. If there are listeners who are residents of the City of Vancouver, you can also take that survey. It's at shapeyourcity.ca/personal-preparedness. And in that way, you can also contribute your own knowledge and experience to our research.
Before you go, I would like to ask you, what might be your expectation regarding the new government in BC that is going to take oath? We don't know which party is going to form government, but when it comes to climate change and natural disasters, what exactly would you expect the new government to do? Are there any continuities that you would like to carry on, or something new that you would expect?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, we don't really know exactly how it's going to shake out yet, to use that term. Right. And this has been a hallmark of the NDP government. As I mentioned, they did establish what was a new Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness in late 2022. So that ministry is still, in a sense, just finding its feet after nearly 2 years, and has been trying to bring together the response to various different kinds of disasters. Often that kind of knowledge, but also the policy practice, has in the past been siloed between different layers or different levels of governance, where there might be one ministry or agency that's responsible for responding to wildfire, another that's handling floods, yet another that's dealing with seismic resilience. And while each of these hazards has its own particular imprint and needs, at the same time, many of the processes for preparedness as well as recovery at the level of community resilience are similar. So it's really important that these mechanisms for response and recovery are integrated under one ministry, as they are now. So hopefully the next government will carry that work forward. That's going to continue to be really important.
We'll keep our fingers crossed on that. Dr. Sara Shneiderman, thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.